The gaming industry is a true giant. Newzoo predicts that by 2026 it will generate around $207 billion a year. That's more than Hollywood blockbusters and the global music industry combined. And yet, why do major studios behave as if they're on the brink of bankruptcy? Why, instead of experimenting, do they keep repeating the same titles over and over again? In this video, we'll look at the opinions of experts and developers to understand what's really going on. Is this just a temporary storm or a real reset of the game development? If you're still here, let's get to the video. Within the industry, the phrase game dev reset has been popping up more and more often, something that sounds almost like an apocalyptic prediction. But what exactly does this reset mean? Simply put, it's a sharp market cooldown after the pandemic boom. Over the last 2 years, investor confidence in the gaming industry has taken a major hit. As Krzysztof Wolicki from Red Square Games notes, right now we can observe a certain crisis of investor confidence in this industry. Falling confidence forces changes in strategy. Instead of risky innovations, we are seeing much safer moves. For years, we were mostly getting already established brands, simply reworked in a new style. Now, some studios are even afraid to add those kinds of progressive elements at all. I can say that I'm not happy about it. In other words, money is no longer as cheap as it used to be. During the pandemic, you could comfortably invest in a mid-tier project and still expect a decent return. After a huge wave of investments and loose monetary policy, we're now seeing rising interest rates and a much more conservative approach. Jamie Keach from Analytic Ventures explains that when government bonds stopped attracting investors, capital flowed into the gaming sector, but only as long as the era of cheap money lasted. Once central banks started raising interest rates, cheap capital dried up and investors began pulling back from riskier projects. The effects have been brutal. A wave of layoffs swept through the industry. In 2023 alone, we started seeing announcements of massive job cuts. According to the latest GDC report, 28% of game developers lost their job at least once in the last 2 years. And in the United States, that number reaches even 33%. What's almost ironic is that these layoffs didn't only hit weaker employees. Many experienced and valuable developers were also affected. In 2023 alone, around 10,000 people lost their jobs, and in 2024, the number was even higher, along with more announcements of future cuts. And all of this happened partly because players could finally go back outside and return to normal life. And even European countries like Poland are no exception. As Monika Michalak from the 8-Bit Agency explains, the biggest crisis in the gaming industry in the last 15 years is currently happening. Studios are finding it much harder to secure funding for the further development. Companies that were overloaded with work just recently are now forced to lay people off. Michalak points out that production of new titles has slowed down, some projects have been cancelled, and that directly generated another wave of layoffs. And often studios had to do this on their own because investors pulled capital out of riskier segments and simply don't want to take the further risks. So, does that mean that the industry is actually collapsing? Not really, it's more like a sudden return to strict financial discipline. According to the industry analyst Cave West, what we are seeing is a regression to the mean after years of insane growth. In practice, that means that by around 2025, new budget limits started to stabilize, maybe smaller, but still solid. The industry isn't dying. The illusion of endless growth is. Many companies had two possible strategies: slow, stable growth with strong financial security, or aggressive expansion with risky investments. A lot of them choose the second option, and that's exactly why they have to lay off people, and that's why the current crisis isn't really the fault of the players. So don't let any company convince you otherwise. it's the short-sightedness of publishers. Remember that the next time publisher tries to blame rising production costs or stagnant player numbers on us, it's actually them who got themselves in this position. Not long ago, investors were throwing money at ambitious projects, believing every new hit would bring tens of millions in profit. Today, that kind of capital is almost a fantasy. In practice, it means every big project has to succeed. When a company spends hundreds of millions of dollars on a AAA game, one failed title can quickly turn into layoffs and difficult conversations with shareholders. Hi-Fi Rush proved that even a successful game doesn't necessarily guarantee the safety of a studio. Former CEO of Nexon explains that executives live under enormous pressure. Imagine spending $300 million on a new blockbuster only to see players react with disappointment. As he writes, "You'll survive the first time, second time they'll openly call for your head, and by the third time they'll try to push you out." It's no surprise that publishers stick to the safe formulas, launching sequels to well-known series or new versions of games that are expected to sell millions of copies. Looking at the years 2022-2023, we can also see a clear trend. Investors are asking one simple question: where are our returns? Kai West summarized it well. Because developers were hypnotized by the era of cheap money, and once capital suddenly froze, they had to cut back. Studios were ordered to deliver products on time or reduce budgets. In practice, many large companies introduced not only layoffs, but also salary freezes and the cancellation of planned DLC projects. All of this makes game development today far more cautious and conservative than it was just a few years ago. Most publishers have apparently decided that the safest business strategy is to rely on known franchises. A new IP is basically a lottery, except you're betting hundreds of millions of dollars. In the era of cheap financing, companies could afford a few crazy ideas, but now the industry feels more like generations of developers meeting over reheated leftovers. And in practice it means endless prototypes of titles like The Witcher 5, Gears 6 or another Cyberpunk. Players might eventually get tired of it, but for investors it provides a sense of security. One market observer even said in The Guardian, "A slate of sequels feels like nostalgic reassurance in a time of chaos." And that's how people describe the 2025 release lineup. In other words, titles like GTA 6, Assassin's Creed Shadows or the next Monster Hunter are meant to bring stability. After all, GTA Online, still generating over $500 million annually, proved that old content with small updates can keep making money for years. With less risk, companies can still earn almost as much as they would with a brand new blockbuster. Remakes and revived classics have therefore become a kind of insurance policy for investments. Nostalgia is now a currency. Instead of risking a completely new brand, studios return to proven formulas. That doesn't mean the new IPs will disappear, but major investors would still much rather see a continuation than a big unknown. Paradoxically, the biggest safe bet for publishers today is a long-running live service game. Even though many players are already tired of the model, a single successful product can secure financial stability for years. Live service games like Fortnite, League of Legends or GTA Online were supposed to be a gold mine, a game that lives for years and continuously pays for itself through subscriptions, skins, cosmetics and premium packs. Decision makers often look at Fortnite as the perfect example. Since 2017, the game has reportedly generated around $20 billion and still brings in billions every year with over 500 million accounts created by players. No wonder why every publisher wanted their own Fortnite. The problem is that most of these attempts ended in failure. The Guardian recently listed 3 major examples: Hyenas by Creative Assembly, Concord by Sony and X-Defiant by Ubisoft. All cancelled before or shortly after release, after massive spending. Each of those studios invested hundreds of millions into live service projects that never truly got off the ground. Their fate shows that the long-term support and monetization are not a guarantee of success if the original idea or player motivation fails. If a game disappoints at launch, even constant updates won't fix it. Nowadays, many games don't even get the chance to rebuild their reputation, like it was with Cyberpunk 2077. Instead, they collapse under waves of negative reviews, exactly what happened with Highguard, which shut down its servers on March 12th. Live service can be extremely profitable, but it's also incredibly demanding. It requires not only massive initial funding, but also constant development, marketing, community support, and huge server infrastructure. Even once the game becomes profitable, developers must continuously produce new content, because players quickly get tired of systems that feel like endless DLC and microtransaction cycles. The growing number of cancelled live service projects sent a clear signal. Many companies have realized that even if they want to build games for the long term, they can't afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. So the question arises, has the industry simply lost its courage? Or maybe its creativity? Many developers and critics argue that the real problem isn't imagination, it's fear of financial disaster. Ken Levine, the legendary creator of BioShock, put it bluntly. The problem with AAA is that if you don't innovate, people start leaving because they've seen it before. He points out the growing dependence on established franchises instead of new ideas. With today's budgets, often reaching hundreds of millions, introducing something truly new becomes extremely risky. Studios can easily lose both investor confidence and player interest at the same time. As a result, we get highly repetitive gameplay loops built around quest, combat quest, something even confirmed by former Square Enix director Jacob Navok. However, there are some small lights on the horizon, hopefully not the headlights of an approaching train. We're already hearing about bold indie projects and smaller studios trying to prove that creativity still pays off. The indie scene has shown for years that you can create huge hits with relatively small budgets. Titles like Hades, Stardew Valley or Slay the Spire are perfect examples. AAA gaming might lose some creative diversity, but it won't disappear, it will simply evolve. So what happens next? Analysts usually mention a few possible scenarios. AA and indie games. There are already signs that medium and small studios will play a bigger role. A Bain & Co. report shows that indie game revenue grew about 22% annually between 2018 and 2024, while AA and AAA titles grew only around 8%. What's more, roughly 3/4 of the highest rated games on Metacritic are now indie titles. With better development tools, modern game engines and global distribution platforms, small teams can now compete with giant studios. That will likely lead to more ambitious projects, smaller in budget but full of fresh ideas. The rise of generative AI is another major test. On one hand, many developers fear AI will replace jobs. Some of the recent layoffs are already being linked to the belief that the simple tasks can be now automated. The GDC report even mentions powerful generative AI tools as one of the factors reshaping the industry. On the other hand, visionaries like Owen Mahoney believe AI could become a blessing. It could shorten development time, help generate assets, and allow small teams to create completely new gameplay systems. Mahoney even claims that AI could potentially triple the size of gaming industry within the next 5 to 7 years. Of course, if we focus on using it to create value instead of complaining about it. Another trend is consolidation. Large companies are acquiring studios to share costs and increase scale. We've already seen massive mergers, department integrations, and closer partnerships with investors. Analysts note that as AAA budgets continue to grow, sometimes reaching hundreds of millions of dollars, it becomes increasingly important to build a larger audience for a single game. The result is fewer independent giants and more large conglomerates and platforms such as Game Pass, expanding social game ecosystems and streaming services. This process could trigger another wave of acquisitions, but also attract larger investment funds focused specifically on gaming. So we return to the original question. Is the industry truly afraid of risk, or is it simply entering a new stage of maturity? The statistics and stories from recent years certainly look like a crisis scenario. Tens of thousands of layoffs, cancelled projects, halted productions, and publishers constantly talking about returning to the roots. But on the other hand, does anyone seriously believe games will stop being made? Demand is enormous. Digital entertainment keeps growing and gaming has become a lifestyle for billions of people. In practice, this current reset might simply be a correction that pushes the industry toward a more stable path. After all, after every storm, the sun eventually comes out. Maybe in a few years we'll look back at these dark clouds with some nostalgia, realizing that the strongest players in the industry emerged from this exact moment. Developers will still take risks, just with more caution and awareness. As you can see, the future of gaming may be both exciting and uncertain. For now, all we can do is stay patient and watch whether this is just a temporary crisis or the beginning of a completely new era of game development. And speaking of patience, I'll also patiently check whether you might leave a like and subscribe to the channel under this video, of course if you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and see you soon.